We need to make sure whatever we put in their hands makes it easier for them to perform tasks within the field and not become a hindrance.
As the electric grid becomes more dynamic and distributed, think DERs, EVs, and smart devices, our infrastructure has to keep up. But while innovation is racing ahead in the control room and in software systems like ADMS and DERMS, there's quite a bottleneck holding it all back, and that is bad data permeating from GIS. So today, we're going to look at this most overlooked but foundational challenge that grid modernization faces, and that's ensuring that accurate, timely, and geospatially aware data flows between the back office and the field, and why it's so critical for the home office and the field to be in sync with asset information. And that's where IQGeo comes in. With us today is Adrian McNulty, Vice President of Utility Solutions at IQGeo. And Adrian has more than 25 years of experience delivering software and technology solutions to the global energy space. And today, he's leading IQGeo's efforts to digitize utility fieldwork and create a mobile-first, data-smart grid from the pole to the back office. And as a reminder, you can catch every episode of Power Perspectives and Energy Central's other shows on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and wherever else you get your shows. So subscribe, leave us a comment or rating, and don't miss our other series you can find in the podcast feed as well, like Piloting the Future, where we learn about the latest in innovation, and the newest one, The Gist, where we dive deep into GIS technology for the power sector. I'm Jason Price, recording from New York City, and I'm joined as always by Matt Chester, Energy Central's community manager and podcast producer, coming to us from Orlando, Florida. So, Matt, before we welcome Adrian, what makes this conversation particularly relevant to our utility listeners right now?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I think what makes this such a timely conversation is that utilities today, they're under pressure from all sides, from extreme weather to growing electrification demands, an evolving mix of DERs. And while we might often focus on flashy technologies like AI, DERMS, advanced control platforms, we know full well that those tools are only as good as the data feeding into them. So that's why today's conversation matters so much. And, if your GIS is out of date or your field crews are working off of inaccurate data, it doesn't just slow things down. It introduces risk, inefficiencies, it wastes time and money. It holds back kind of all these modernization initiatives. So synchronizing that real-time accurate data between the field and the back office, it's definitely moved from a nice to have to mission critical. And I think our members at Energy Central they're hearing that message loud and clear. So what I'm hoping to hear from today's conversation is how to move from that problem statement to some real ways to resolve it. And I think Adrian is going to have a message that resonates with our members in that way.
Yeah, I would agree. So thank you for that, Matt. And thanks to IQGeo for making today's episode possible. And now let's get to the show. So let's bring him in. Adrian McNulty, welcome to Energy Central's Power Perspectives podcast.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. Quite excited to join you today. I listen to a lot of podcasts, but this is the first time I've ever been in one, so go easy on me.
We will. Let's have some fun, but let's have a spirited conversation as well, all right? So, Adrian, let's start with your journey. You've worked across ADMS, field mobility, and now at IQGeo. So I want to hear, what is your view about grid modernization, and really, how has this evolved over the years?
It's a really good question. I think looking back, I've been lucky to see a lot of different things across the energy space. And I think the grid modernization, even though it's a modern term, I think it's been evolving, at least in my career. I remember starting off doing power generation DCS systems. Back then, everything was hardwired. The valve, actuations, the sensors, everything hardwired back into PLCs. I'm sure if you build a new power station today, it's all IP-based. In the early 2000s, I was part of a large modernization of substations. And in those, we were replacing electric and mechanical relays with multifunction microprocessors and substation automation. So I saw that even as 25 years ago, as a first path of digitization in the field. Roll on a few years later, I was lucky to be part of the first phase of ADMS rollouts. Back in 2010, you guys probably remember the AR array really accelerated the ADMS systems firstly, and then the rollout of ADMS systems. So we start to see the convergence of standalone systems of SCADA, outage management, and then new advanced applications and automation put in on top of that. But it also spurred the modernization of what's in the field. We started to see more reclosers, controllable devices, line sensors, fault locators. So I think that's a huge modernization effort. Rolling to where we are today, whatever you call it, the energy transition, but things that are underpinned by decarbonization, That's having a massive impact on grid mod, touching everything. We're basically rebuilding the fabric of the grid, taking something that was designed for a certain flow and redesigning it to accommodate DERs connected at different points, EVs, all of the above. And now the new applications that run these are more complex as well. What's near and dear to my heart in modernization is digitization. Actually looking at what work is being performed and how do you look at it from an end-to-end workflow and digitize it. I think that's the era where IQGeo can really help. I think the next frontier is going to be what happens with AI. I think we're really starting to touch the edges of how AI impacts utility operations, both in the field and in the back office. So it's been exciting times in my career so far, and I expect the next 10 or so years will be just as exciting.
That's great. I mean, certainly nothing sits still, and that's quite a journey. So I want to understand and connect the dots here regarding IQGeo and GIS. So what distinguishes your company from the marketplace with other GIS providers, given the context of what we're talking about here?
I see IQGeo as much more than a GIS. So if you think of like the traditional GIS when it first came into the marketplace, it essentially was a digital mapping system of the assets in the field, and designed to be inside the office, in the back office, desktop application for expert users. It was never designed to be taken into the field initially, which is, to me, is a little bit ironic because all of the assets that it's modeling are in the field. So I think we took a different perspective. We started with this mobile first concept. And by that, we mean we wanted it to be an architecture, an application that it doesn't matter where you access it from. As in, if you access it from your office, from the field, from a browser, from an iPad, it shouldn't matter about what data you see and how you interact with it. And underpinning this is three kind of capabilities I look at. One of them is really first the native mobility of going mobile first. So that's any device, anywhere. The second is we build this very flexible modeling capabilities, whether it's modeling the physical network or modeling data models that enable workflows. And then the third part is configurable workflows. And when you put those three together, you get the ability to spatially enable work in the field. I think nobody argues with the power of spatially enabled workflows. I think we all use Google on a day-to-day basis. But I feel that's what differentiates IQGeo. It's not just modeling the assets that are in the field. It's enabling you to perform work against it, whether that's data capture in the field or an as-built from a design, or inspecting an asset, or responding to an outage, be able to manage all this inside one platform.
Okay. So managing onto one platform. So that's, the proverbial single point of truth, right? The sort of the single source. All right. So let's go with that. So no one would argue that the importance of having that single source from the data captured in the field, bring to the back office and such. So why do utilities have such a challenge overcoming some of this?
I think some of it's historical. Ideally, we want, regardless of the application, where you're accessing it, what task is being performed, you want to be running off the same data set, and you want it to be an accurate reflection of what's happening in the field, because there's a lot of things that happen on a day-to-day basis. There's ongoing work, there's reinforcements, there's temporary cuts, things like that. So I think that some of the barriers are historical data issues. So I think that's driven by when the first modeling of the system started. Moving data from where work is happening to the systems that consume the data. Historically, there's been very few systems that can transfer the data without some type of transformation, or there's still manual processes of entering data. And then there's the delays. It's quite common that we see delays from when something happens in the field to that data being propagated, going through the right QC checks, and making it into all of the systems that need to consume the data. I think those three make it quite challenging for utilities to achieve it. So I think, how do we mitigate against that? I really think when you start to look at bidirectional data flows that are more event-driven, they help remove some of the barriers.
Right, that's interesting. So, all right, so we've got a grid that has got pretty much dated infrastructure, and yet we're throwing on and trying to modernize by throwing on DR and bidirectional load flows and trying to make it what it's not originally designed to do. So explain for the audience the risks of relying on outdated models and disconnected field processes, and what is the outcome of something like that, given the context of trying to modernize it at the same time?
Yeah, we're essentially trying to build a plane while we're flying, or rebuild it, right? Like some of the major impacts I see of DERs, decarbonization, is I mentioned earlier, we're fundamentally rebuilding the structure of the grid. New devices, reinforcing, all that type of stuff. So there's a significant amount of work that's happening now and is going to continue to happen over the next decade or so with distribution and transmission. So what we already see, there's already a backlog and the delay of getting these things in. The challenge is we just talked about working off the same data, the same model. The applications that we're now putting on top of the grid, the ADMSs, flexibility applications in DERMS, they require up-to-date and accurate information. So not just and this is things like, is the line length of the impedances correct? Is the electrical, can it solve load flow? Can volt var optimization work? Things like that. So more and more with all the volume of changes, I've started to see utilities want to be more event driven and see, rather than waiting till there's a night update of a GIS, for example, that goes into ADMS, can we move to it to be more transactional? As in, hey, we just put this circuit into regular energized, can we push it in? We've got it in the plan. So I think the real risk is around operating these applications, but it also comes to a safety and an efficiency risk as well. You want to make sure that when the guys are in the field working, they're doing it safely and they've got the most accurate view of what should be in the network.
All right, well, let's talk about that. So the guys in the field, the men and women who are keeping our grid running, how do you design these systems to make their lives easier? And a lot of solutions just seem to be just providing another screen or another device to log things in. But talk to us now, like what is going on here that's making this more streamlined for them?
Yeah, I've been fortunate, I've had the chance to sit with different field crews from different utilities and also from different generations. And you're right, we need to make sure whatever we put in their hands makes it easier for them to perform tasks within the field and not become a hindrance. And some of the things I've seen is that when they're in the field, they're having to access multiple applications depending on the work type they're doing or depending on what task of the workflow they're actually performing. Right, so the more we can do to consolidate into one application, but also make it easier to use. We don't want to overcomplicate. Imagine being in the field and opening up a complex desktop application just to start filling out forms. It'd be quite complex. So I think, to me, regardless of whether the work's planned or unplanned, it's trying to consolidate as much as possible and simplify the end-to-end workflow or how they interact with the technology. We're starting to see more and more, most utilities in North America issuing iPads to the crews. So there's still a lot of tough books in the trucks. What we didn't expect was that individual members of the crews would start to use their phones. So, they're accessing data now from 3 different devices. Could be the Windows application in the truck, the iPad, and now the phone. But they want to make sure they've got the same data, the same user experience. So one of the things that we didn't really expect this with an IQGeo. We created this capability where you could exchange a session using a QR code. So imagine you're logged in and you're on your iPad and you've got to go in a bucket truck or a trench or something. You wanted to pass it to your phone. You can just pass it over to it with a QR code and it takes the whole session over. And a lot of our customers are starting to use that more and more. But the one thing I hear over and over again from our customers is simple, keep it simple.
All right. It's so interesting that we're having this conversation because this morning I had a conversation with another company and you pointed out that regulatory approvals tend to be like for this one device. So it has its own platform, it has its own set of rules and data, and it's one device. So what ends up happening is you get a utility that's got tons of devices, each with its own set of rules, and so they're not talking to each other. There's overlap. They only do very narrow, specific things because that's all they got approved to fund. So it sounds like IQGeo is kind of overcoming some of this by providing one spatial tool to envelop lots of data that has been accumulated over time from other devices. And am I understanding that? And if that's the case, then what's driving that? And what's been the outcome and the feedback in the field for this?
That's a really good question. So we are trying to focus on, because I see that a lot. There's they diverge a little bit. So an application becomes obsolete, and they look to replace it as a capital program, and they look at that discrete set of functionality. What we're trying to, when we talk to our customers, we try to look at the workflows that are trying to be achieved and what the business outcomes are. So the broader picture. And by that way, digitizing end to end to end. So I think what we're doing is providing a spatially aware, network aware capability of performing the tasks in the field. The response that we get is it does help. It does reduce costs in some respect because you're reducing technical debt. So if you think of it from an IT perspective, there's some technical debt that comes with that. If you think of it as a user perspective, it just helps them be more efficient and safer while they're actually performing the work. They're only doing work in one, and they can keep the full end-to-end tasks, all the things they need to do within whatever workflow it is, an inspection or design and as built, all through the same application. You get the consistency. This should drive data quality improvements because you're not transacting the data. And it should reduce the latency of getting data back into other systems if you've got the bidirectional integrations that we talked about before.
In a lot of the conversations around, companies that I mentioned, it's more aspirational. You've played it out. You've got it installed. You've got some case studies. So can you share some examples of engagements that IQGeo has, brought to market and is, what the performance has been like?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. So we really started this journey mobilizing GIS data. That was our initial journey with IQGeo. It was put in a simple application that has all of the GIS data, all of the facility attribution. So you can go in the field and locate a device. You can trace, you can see what's upstream and downstream, make data edits. That was our original value proposition. And our customers started to ask us, or push us really, around doing more and more. Now we've got all of this in the field. How do we perform work against it? And I'm going to go off on a little bit. So I think user adoption is key. And I'll come back to the original question. We had one gentleman, we're working with one of our customers, and he was adamant he was never going to, he was an experienced lineman, he was adamant he was never going to use an iPad. Why do I need this iPad in my life? So after 1 day's training and probably 2 or 3 days in the field, you can't prise that iPad from his hands right now. So some respect, like user adoption is really important. Well, back to the original question, another one of our customers who'd rolled out the GIS mobility, we're doing a workshop with them around trying to understand what a day in the life of a crew looks like. All the different types of work that they have to work through or they get on the work order list. And we started looking at outage mobility. And so the crew walked through, they're already using an outage mobile application as an extension from their ADMS, and they had IQGeo for a GIS mobility. What they showed us was they jumped between the two applications. They'd open up they'd get an outage notification on their app, and they'd open up the ticket details. They'd immediately jump manually into IQGeo. They'd enter the device ID, search for it. They'd use IQGeo to do the navigation. Once they got there, they would use IQGeo for tracing, understanding what's around. And then they pop back into the ADMS application to do damage code, fill out the form. What was the damage? What was the cause? ETR, that type of stuff. And they asked us, well, can we do this all inside IQGeo? We want to just stay inside one application. So that was the first time we deployed outage mobility. And now we're doing it to a couple of different large utilities in North America, where regardless of the ADMS, the mobility side of responding to an outage is built into IQGeo. So we've got all the underlying GIS data, all the connections, but the workflow has been built to push back the data to outage. And what we typically, it's quite common that we see, we call it landing. We have a landing use case, but most of our utilities start off with one use case that's got a pain point. And then they look to build different workflows into IQGeo to really bring together as much as possible into one application.
All right. Well, we've turned a corner in terms of technology. I feel like there's more innovation in the past year or two in terms of how to help optimize the grid than ever before. It's just extraordinary, the rate of innovation. And now many utilities, particularly the IOUs, are looking at an AMI 2.0, right? It's the whole rolling out an entire new generation of smart meters and such. So we're talking about a lot of field applications, a lot of field technologies. It's just, so in your opinion, what does the future look like? What is, like, say, the next 3 to 5 years? And what do you think is the most important evolution in how utilities manage this field to office data pipeline?
Yeah, you're right. So you probably, a few years back, we would probably say that the utility industry was a little bit slow to adopt new technology and quite conservative. And you're right, especially with last 3 to 5 years, I feel like that's shifted. You see more and more workloads move from on-prem to the cloud, which 5 years ago probably wouldn't have happened. So I think there's definitely a trend where new technology is accepted now, a lot more than probably it would have been, as long as it's done so in a safe and effective way. I think in the short term, there's a couple of things that I think 3 to 5 years will really help. If we really start to stop looking at the individual application, but look at the end-to-end workflow and build bidirectional data workflows around them. In some cases, it makes sense for them to be event-driven. In some cases, it doesn't. but where it makes sense, have it event driven so that you're pushing back data to whatever other systems need to consume to operate. I think the second aspect is the introduction of AI. So, we can apply AI to help in the field and automate certain tasks, as in remove the manual QA/QC, have image recognition, do things like that. I think it will also help with removing certain types of manual data entry. There's certain technologies, OCR, images, things like that. But also I think in the future, AI agents will help identify data anomalies or, point the field crews into where something doesn't look like, so they help them speed up the process. So at IQGeo, we're actually just about to, in Distributed Tech in March, we announced we're acquiring a company called Deepomatic, and they are focused on AI image recognition, but purely for field workers. And they work as a good fit for IQGeo because they work in telcos and utilities. And we were looking for technology that scales. That was very important to us because we work with very large utilities and very large telcos. So we needed something that was proven from a scalability. Last year they processed 20 million work orders using image recognition. So we should hopefully be announcing the close of that acquisition in the next week or so. And then we've got a 3-step strategy. First is integrate. So I integrate IQGeo into the AI image recognition technology and apply it to work orders like image inspection. Damage assessment is another one where we've heard from customers. The second step is embed. And then the third step is then build agents. So the agents then will really just be embedded into the end-to-end workflows. So I think AI is going to have a significant impact, and I think it's going to come quicker than most people think.
All right, really interesting. All right, so Adrian, we are going to give you the final word, but we're going to shift now to a section of the show we call the lightning round, where we get a chance to learn a little more about you, the person, rather than you, the professional. So we're going to ask Matt to come on back in. He's going to throw some questions at you. We ask you to keep your response to one word or phrase. And so, are you ready?
I think so.
Excellent. So, Adrian, if you weren't doing the work you're doing now in the energy sector and with IQGeo, what do you think you would have ended up doing instead?
So I used to want to be an F1 mechanic, but I think if I'd do it now, it'd be mountain biking or golf.
You live in the United States now, but we know you're originally from Ireland. So for anybody planning a trip over there, what's something that you think is a must-add to their planning list?
So I actually grew up in Manchester, but my parents are Irish. I spent a lot of time in Ireland growing up. So what I'd say is Dublin's a very cool city. I've got family in Dublin, but get a rental car, go and visit the West Coast, and be sure to stop for a nice pint of Guinness.
Sounds great. If you're planning your dream dinner party, who would be on the invite list? Current, historical, fictional, it doesn't matter.
I think I'm boring on that one. As someone who grew up away from, or someone who lives away from where he grew up, I'd probably pick my friends and family.
One of the things we like to do is collect lightning round questions from our previous podcast guests to ask the future guests. So one we have for you is from a conversation we had earlier this year with Kevin Matthews at First Student. And his question, it ties into a lot of what we've already talked about today, but what do you think will be the impact of artificial intelligence to the energy world, particularly in the world of generation and transmission? And as a part B, how are we going to be able to address that as it continues to become a rapidly increasing issue?
Sure, that's a rapid answer. I think AI data centers will start to become more energy sufficient. So they'll have their own generation that should relieve some of the burden on transmission. But then you could also read the question into how will it, I think also longer term, we can look at AI helping with modeling consumption versus generation, helping with the balancing of the system. So that's kind of a way I look at that question.
Absolutely. I think it's a good answer. And now we'll flip the script and it's your turn. So you get to leave a lightning round question for a future guest, and it can be on the topic of energy that we're talking about now, or it can be kind of an off the wall one. So it's up to you.
This is a question I asked myself. If you had a blank piece of paper and you could start from scratch, what would the energy delivery system look like?
That's an interesting one. I like it. And then the last one is, what are you most motivated by?
This sounds a little bit cliche. I like making an impact. I love being with a customer, understanding the problems, the challenges they're facing, and how we can apply technology to it. That really excites me, and I like to be busy.
Well, very nice. Thank you for that. Thank you, Matt. Thanks for jumping on. And Adrian, nice job with the responses. I would concur with many of them. So, all right. So knowing that you have a utility executive audience listening in, there's a lot that we covered, but what are some thoughts and final thoughts you want to share with them?
Yeah. So one of the things is more of a higher level, and it's not specific to IQGeo, but I see a lot of utilities taking on massive IT projects. And in some cases, several of them at once. So my recommendation, we do this while we're talking to customers about deploying IQGeo, is start small and scale fast, and get something in the hands of the users, whether they're in the field or in the back office. Get value out of whatever you're deploying as quickly as possible, and iterate and build upon it. You're going to get the quickest user adoption, and you're going to get the most positive feedback from your user base.
Well, you've taken some rather complex challenges and creatively have put some focus and scope around it. We call that in consulting speak, we call that circling the square. So nice job circling those squares. And I know that our audience of Energy Central listeners will probably have lots of questions and comments that they'll want to post. So Adrian, I encourage you to keep the conversation going and stay connected with the Energy Central community. So thank you again for your participation today.
No, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you both, and look forward to connecting to the community.
Well, Matt, that was an interesting conversation with Adrian McNulty of IQGeo. Why don't you share with us what was something that stood out for you, what you heard today?
Yeah, no, and I know Adrian mentioned to us that it was his first time doing a podcast, but whenever somebody says that to us, it always seems that that's not the case, because he had a lot of great insights. He shared them really concisely and explained, like you mentioned, some of the technical topics in a really easy to understand way. And I think what jumped out to me as he did that was, the idea of those bidirectional data flows he mentioned. It kind of just got me thinking about 10, 15 years ago when we're studying the smart grid. It was all about bidirectional energy flows. And obviously that's still important. But the idea that, hey, well, we're really looking at the data being just the same there, and arguably just as valuable to the utility companies as the actual electrons flowing back and forth. It shows how the idea of modernization or smart grid, whatever you want to call it, shows how that's really evolved over the past decade, 2 decades.
Well, those are good. What stood out for me, two things that stood out for me. One is his comment about having a pint of Guinness in Ireland.
Absolutely.
That one you can't disregard. And the second one, equally important, if not more, is I think he's describing this environment with all the technology that's coming on the grid and continues to, all these innovations. What does it mean for all the data and talking to each other, and the role of AI in sorting this out? It could be really interesting. It could be right now it's a real unknown. It's sort of like this black box. But, we just need to give it some time to see what use cases will tease out of all this information as we continue to evolve and modernize the grid. So I think just his portrayal of what he's currently seeing and where his thinking is, I think it's pretty accurate. I don't think there's anything science fiction or outlandish. And I think only time will tell as we continue to apply these innovations and leverage AI on top of that.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. It's, it wasn't too long ago, all these AI applications, they did feel like the works of science fiction or just something that was, big ideas, but how do we actually execute them? But, you see it on the pages of Energy Central now. It's almost become something that you're not impressed with. Well, of course you're using AI for this. And of course AI is going to help us benefit that. And so it's really, you could argue it's kind of gone over the hype cycle down into like, no, this is practical, this is real. And listening to Adrian, somebody who's knee deep in it, to see, well, what does that actually look like? What are the case studies? I think that's invaluable for us to hear, and for our community listening in. And obviously I'll highlight that we want to hear from the community about what their biggest takeaways are. If they have follow-up questions for Adrian, you can leave those in the comments, and we'll be sure to have them follow up, like you mentioned, Jason, and anything that you want to do. That's what the community is there for. So be sure to keep that conversation going on Energy Central.
Man, I think that's a really good call out. If you listen to the podcast over the years, it's from a very slow, like science fiction, to an unknown but curious, to like this sort of the normal bell curve, right? So we're rising up into like more people getting in and getting their hands dirty around AI. And so I think it's really interesting if you listen to the conversations, the nature of discussions around AI and how it's evolved just from the conversations in the podcast over the years. Well, on that note, I want to thank our sponsors for today's episode. That's IQGeo. Now, IQGeo provides geospatial-based software that creates intelligent networks across the globe by helping utility, telecom, and fiber companies see more, know more, and achieve more in their networks. And once again, I'm your host, Jason Price. Plug in and stay fully charged in the discussion by hopping into the community at energycentral.com, and we'll see you next time at the Energy Central Power Perspectives Podcast.